What type of exposures do the professional DFS players have for NFL? Today, we're going to look at that. Let's go. All right, we are moving on with the Fantasy Cruncher review of the 2021 season, and we're going to be looking at quarterback exposure caps. We want to know what type of exposure limit do we have on these quarterbacks. We know this many. We're in the highest finishing 150 lineup entry. And then we also want to know how many players and what type of exposure caps. Those are the things that we're going to be looking at today. We'll be highlighting those and getting those answers. So what I'll be doing is I'll going through every single week. This is the 2021 week one $9 slant. I'll be using the slant for every single review that we do so that we're not changing the variable. We want to learn this exact tournament, and we want to look at the highest finishing 150 maxer for each tournament. So we can see when we click on the overview tab exactly how many players are used. How cool is that? So we see 122 players were used for the second place finisher, but the highest finishing 150 maxer. When we go to his exact team, we can see the exposure cap on quarterbacks was 24%, and then all other players 52%. So what we do is we go back to our Excel sheet and we type in 24% for exposure. We type in how many players, 122, positional player cap, 52. And I'll format these later so they're all color coordinated. They've got the percentages in there, all that good stuff. Then we click on this button up here. I'm in the NFL lineup study section. So we click on these little three arrows. We go back to tournaments. We're going to click on this tab right here. This is a little drop down menu, and I'm going to go click week 2 and update. From here, you can sort by cost. You can sort by prize pool. I'm going to sort by prize pool and just eyeball the number 9 right here for the $9 slant. You click this analyze arrow button and bam, it pops everything up. I like to click this little fit columns to table with. It allows me to see all of the different amounts of things I'm looking for, like players used. So we can see here, and by the way, if you want to look at individual exposures and see, well, how often did they fade the highest rostered player? I mean, these are the types of things we can do here in Fantasy Cruncher lineup study to get better. So I'm looking at John Galt JD. This person took first place, also at 150 lineups, 102 players used. And when I go look at his team by clicking the magnifying glass, I can look at all his stuff here. I can see that his quarterbacks were capped at 19% and all players 22%. And we did see that he had 102 players rostered on this week. So I go back here and I can see, well, look at this. It's not like 102, it's 20 less, and it's not like it's a 9-game slate. It's the same size. We can see how many games are in each slate in this column here. So quarterbacks exposure, 19%. We're just going to round our numbers off here. 22% for positional player stack. And again, we are not trying to deep dive into each and every single crevice that we could dive into for researching, because my goodness, my friends, I posed a question in Discord and I was like, hey guys, what do you guys want me to research? And I had 8 or 9 people reply back. There's always going to be something I'm not thinking of. There's always going to be another angle you can look at. The beauty of using lineup studies, you guys can research until your heart is content and you feel good about what you've researched to prepare for the season. We're looking at the overview. I'm going to click this button again, fit columns, and I can see the highest finisher right here ended up with an exposure cap of 50%, quarterbacks at 28%, and 134 players. 28% of exposure for quarterbacks, 104 players, and 52% positional cap. Strike that, 51% for exposure cap. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom through the rest of this research for you. Come back when I get through the rest of the regular season, and I'm going to break down every single thing I found for the 2021 season, and we'll talk about it together. Be right back. All right, I think I found a very interesting trend. Let's talk about the findings and how I think we can maybe target the beginning of the NFL season. All right, I've zoomed the screen in, 175%. Let's do this. Again, games, column B. How many quarterbacks? Column C. Today, we looked at the exposure cap. And by the way, at the end of this series, and there'll be probably 6 or 7 more questions we're going to try to answer. There'll probably be about a dozen or so. I'm going to give away this Excel sheet to all of my members, and you guys can grab those. I'll probably just post them on the website, teamriserfall.com, or in Discord. And if you want, go ahead and use promo code 75OFF, and you'll get 75% off your first month with us. That's crazy. You end up getting 20 bucks to use on Fantasy Cruncher every month, too. Very, very nice deal. But I digress. Let's go. So out of the 18 regular season weeks, 14 of the 18 weeks was at 28% or less, 29% or less, excuse me. So basically, you have all of these winning 150 max files, and they're spreading their quarterback usage out pretty far. I mean, think about it this way. If your highest exposed quarterback in week 1 was 24%, that means you have 11 other quarterbacks to share the other 76%. And you guys can do the math again. You'll have this Excel sheet. I'll give it to you at the end of this series in a week or two, and you'll be able to look at it and do the math and have this to create your own type of baseline studies. I think you use this sheet and all of my answers, and you look at it and you're like, oh man, well, I wonder if this happened. And then you go research it, or you go dive into Lineup Rewind and you test out some theories. So this is going to be like the thought-provoking sheet. I don't think it's an answer key, but it's definitely going to help you. When you're looking at the players, look at the beginning of the season. First 6-7 weeks, all right? I think weeks 1 through 4, no bye weeks, and we had bye weeks kicking in week 5. And you can see with the game starting to trend down, 12, 10, 10, away from 13, even down here 10, 9. It's less players. But I think, honestly, look at the player usage. The beginning of the year, everybody's trying to figure it out. They're wondering who's good, who's going to pop off, who's the next Cooper Kupp for this season, right? And that's the goal. All right? So everybody's looking. And then everybody finds who those players are. Here's where you start to see the pros start to identify ways to capitalize on these early findings before the field does. So you get opportunities like this, where somebody posts a player pool with only 65 players in it, 9 quarterbacks, highest owned 25% at a time, only 65 players used. The highest owned player they had was 98% rostered. That was like 142 out of 145 lineups, 147 out of 150 lineups. And then their next highest rostered player was 55%, so on and so forth. Highest rostered 83%, next highest 56. Now, you can see once people kind of figured out, oh yeah, Cooper Kupp's good. Okay, yeah. This player's good, that player's good, this player's not. You see the player pool size really starts to dwindle down. And we actually do not get over 100 again for the final 11 weeks of the NFL season. And when you're looking at the players' exposure caps, you start to see some higher caps too. 98, 83, 87, 51, 75, 63, 73, 75, 78, 99. Someone went a 99% on a player. Now, there's going to be some spots throughout this research where when you see this, I wrote down 75, 47. This is where you had a guy like Dearness Johnson starting for the Cleveland Browns because both Hunt and Chubb were hurt, and you get a running back who's like 5K, 4K, is going to get a million touches. He was super highly owned. And then the second highest owned player, 47. So I put those as kind of like the outlier percentages. I think Cooper Kupp was this 1 week. Justin Jefferson was another when he was still too cheap, so on and so forth, to kind of highlight that. So the two things I wanted to highlight today, the big takeaways, in my opinion, is the fact that when we're looking at the exposure caps for quarterbacks, 29% or less in 14 out of the last 18 weeks in the 2021 season. And then after that, after 6 weeks of the NFL season of having 100 plus players for how many people are being used, 6 of the first 7 weeks, the final 11 weeks of the regular season, the most we had in anybody's 150 max file was 92 players. So once the field kind of figured out who are the good, who's the bad, who's going to step in and have the increased role when player A is hurt or player B is out, who's player C and what's their ceiling, what kind of probability they have and what type of range do they have scoring wise. And once the field figured that out, you'd have tighter amounts of players being used, but you'd have a looser exposure cap as people tried to capitalize on what they deemed were high upside, high probability type situations, hoping the field made mistakes and then they would just beat them at the other spots. All right. I'll see you again next time. We're going to be covering winning stacks and the most used stacks. Like, what type of size do we have? Are we talking about game stacks, team stacks only? Are we talking about onslaught stacks? What kind of stacks are winning tournaments? That's the next series. Let's go.